With this talk, we concluded our contributed talks. If you have any questions for them, all the clusters are up, and I'm sure they will be very welcoming. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Emma Bernskill. Emma Bernskill did her PhD at MIT, then a postdoc at Berkeley, then assistant professor at CMU, and now assistant professor at Stanford. She has received many awards like the SAR faculty or the every year. So all along she has been focusing on learning methods, machine learning methods that will help people achieve their goals. And to do that, her group has been focusing in reinforcement learning both algorithmically and theoretically. Here at NIPS she has 3 papers, and 2 of them are on the option framework that is very relevant for hierarchical reinforcement learning. So to learn more about this, please welcome with me Emma Bernskill.
Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here. So I was really enjoying listening to Peter's talk. There's been a lot of wonderful talks at NIPS. And when I was listening to Peter's talk this morning, I was thinking about, again, this issue of, when does hierarchy help? I feel like it's such an appealing notion to think about temporal abstraction, and I think it's the way that we as humans think about it a lot. And he had this really nice layout of the different ways that we think it helps. And one of them is in the context of multitask learning, that we think that we can learn structure and leverage that structure to speed up learning in the future. As was just kindly mentioned, I do a lot of work also on the theoretical side, and so we were really curious a few years ago to see whether or not we could provably show situations under which options or other forms of hierarchy provably speed learning. And when I think about speeding learning, I'm thinking about the amount of data we need to learn to make good decisions. And in fact, we could show that there are under certain scenarios that we can provably speed learning from having this structure, which is validating a lot of the stuff we know empirically, that empirically it can make a very big difference if we already have good options or structure. And of course, there's been lots of other work. I'm just picking up some of the work that we've done in this group. And then I think secondly, there's this idea that one of the ways it's going to speed learning is by improving exploration. And one of the papers that we had here today looks at, both in this workshop and over this week, looks at how it changes how we explore. It can change the states that are reachable, it can change how quickly we can reach those states, and often for the better, and sometimes counterintuitively for the worse. So I think that's a second really important area where hierarchy can help. But I'm going to talk about some other ways that I think hierarchy can help, and I think it's something that I'm afraid I couldn't be here all today. I had some other engagements as well, but I think it's likely to be something people haven't talked about as much because of the domains which I focus on. And so I think the other place where I think hierarchy helps us a lot is not in helping us learn for the future, but learning from the past. So what I think about a lot when I think about reinforcement learning is systems that interact with people. And so we have the classic reinforcement learning loop, but instead of having a video game or an environment in the middle, like manipulation or grasping, we're thinking about intelligent tutoring systems, or we're starting to think about cases where we're interacting with patients or customers. And the question is, how do we maximize the reward signal in these scenarios? And I often talk about all the ways that people are hard and there are difficulties compared to video games and robots, but there's also a huge advantage to working with people, and one is that we have a lot of prior data. I think this may happen in the future for robotics, but we're not yet in the case where everyone has 8 robots in their home, and so we're getting this huge continuous stream of data. Whereas that really is the case for things like education and healthcare and customers, that we have this enormous amount of data about prior decisions made and their outcomes. And that's a real benefit when we start to think about these systems. So in particular, when I'm talking today, I'm going to be talking mostly about what I call the batch reinforcement learning setting. It's also relevant whenever we're doing off-policy reinforcement learning. But for right now, let's think about the case where we're entirely offline. So we're given a batch of data about decisions and their outcomes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, the exact scenario. So in particular, here's a scenario which I think about a lot because of the data and the types of experiments I run, which is you have a set of classrooms, it's called the A classrooms, and in them they have one particular sequence of interventions, and then we have an average score. and then of 95, and then we have another set of classrooms which have the same set of interventions or actions but flipped, and we have a different outcome. And I've been mentioning this example to a number of people this week, and then I ask people what we should do for a new student, and people say a number of really good observations, like how do we know whether 95 is better than 92, how many data points are in each of these, how do we know what type of students are in classroom A or classroom B, and a number of other really important observations. So this comes up in many different domains. While I tend to focus on the people case, this comes up in things like condition-based maintenance, when we have prior data. It comes up a lot in things like healthcare, where we have different sequences of interventions, and we want to know what would be good for a new person. And it involves this really key challenge of counterfactual reasoning, where we have the B classrooms and we don't know what would have happened if we had done this other sequence of interventions. It also has the big challenge that we need to generalize to untried policies. So when I was speaking in the counterfactual reasoning workshop earlier this week, a lot of the time there's been really great work there thinking about what if you make one decision, but one of the hard and important aspects of reinforcement learning is we're going to make many decisions. And in fact, today I'm going to be particularly talking about what happens when we have very long horizon decision making. And of course, in those scenarios, we have a combinatorial number of actions and sequences that we can end up taking, and we don't want to have to try all of those in order to be able to generalize. So just to be precise here, the setting that I'm thinking about is this batch data policy evaluation problem, and I promise I'm going to get to why hierarchy is important soon. And in this case, we're going to have these data on these decisions and the outcomes, and we're going to have a set or an infinite set of policies that we want to evaluate. And then maybe we want to be making some decision on top of this. So we first started thinking about this in the context of a game called Refraction that was developed by my colleague Zoran Popovich and his students at the University of Washington. It's been played by about 500,000 students. And we wanted to figure out how to best sequence levels adaptively, treating as a reinforcement learning problem, given our old data that was numeric. So in this case, for better or worse, the horizon is pretty short. Most people play this game for only on the order of, say, 3 to 7 levels. So in terms of the horizon of decision making, it is very short. But in other cases, we get to interact with people for much longer. So in this sort of scenario, this fractions tutor, people are doing on the order of like 30 to 100 problems. We go in and use these in schools for somewhere between 3 or 4 days to maybe over the course of a week or two. So that's a longer horizon problem, and that introduces a lot of interesting different technical issues that I'm going to talk about and why that's related to hierarchy. So in this scenario, we have this long horizon problem, and what we want to do is use our old data to figure out what we should do in the future. And so a natural question might be, why don't we just use a model as a simulator, build an MLE model or a deep neural network model? But there are a lot of problems with doing that. We often get compounding error, which is going to get even worse over this long horizon. So an alternative that was proposed by Joanna Breakup and her colleagues around the early 2000s was importance sampling. And importance sampling is a technique that's been used for a long time. I'm sure many of you are using it in the audience. Just as a quick refresher, and so we're all using the same terminology, per-decision importance sampling makes an additional observation over importance sampling, which is we don't need to be, the reward that we get, we can decompose it in terms of the time step at which we received it. So we have this old data, which we're going to think of these trajectories, tau, that were generated by some behavior policy, and our goal is to estimate the value of an alternative behavior policy. And so the way we can do this is we can decompose the probability of us taking an action under our new evaluation policy divided by the probability of taking it under our old behavior policy. And the really nice thing about doing this is that we don't need to know the dynamics of the world, so we don't have to have a model of how the world works. And it's an unbiased estimator, but the problem is it might be high variance. So again, this has been used in a lot of different policy grading approaches, but the high variance aspect is what I'm going to talk about now. So if we're in the short horizon problem, it's not too bad that it's high variance, but and we've used this in the past to try to get substantially better policies in some educational games. But if you are in this long horizon setting, the variance of an importance sampling estimator can scale exponentially with your time horizon. So that's what I want to talk about now is a paper that my student Diana Goff led at NIPS this year, along with my former postdoc Bill Thomas. And the issue is, how do we use hierarchy to try to tackle this problem? So we want to take our old data, we want to be able to evaluate what would happen under alternative policies. And what I'm going to argue to you is that if we pick that policy class carefully in a way that we look at sort of hierarchical style policies, that we might be able to get much better estimates of those hierarchical policies than we would about the generic policy classes. That's the thing. So just to be a bit more formal about this, so what is the challenge of this long horizon batch evaluation? Well, we could prove, and it's not too surprising, that the variance of the per decision importance sampling estimator is exponential in your horizon in the worst case. So you're just going to get these enormously high variance estimates, and often you're not going to be able to say anything in this long horizon problem of how these alternative policies will take. So in our case, we had a classroom study where people were doing these horizons of roughly 30 to 100 problems, and we only had 1,000 data points, so we had 1,000 trajectories, which is pretty large for a classroom study, but obviously laughably small in the case of reinforcement learning. But the question is, how could we possibly evaluate alternative policies in this scenario? And so just to motivate this is certainly a problem that comes up in education, but it comes up in healthcare, and it comes up in Atari games. There are many, many situations where we really do want to deal with very long horizon problems. Peter was saying this, my former postdoc advisor, Stuart Russell, used to say, win or lose life in about, I think it was 10 to the trillion moves. So we would like to be able to start thinking about these longer horizon problems. So, as we've also heard about today, and I'm sure most people are familiar, there's a popular framework that is these options-based policies, where we think of there being this meta-policy over options, sub-skills, and then we're going to be using that meta-policy to decide about sub-policies or options. The question is whether we can leverage the structure in order to do better offline evaluation. So the first thing that we thought about in this case is, let's go back to our per decision importance sampling and look at that estimator. So the problem that we're getting right now in terms of that horizon is that we're getting this product over many, many terms, H terms in the worst case. And we'd really like to tackle that product of importance weights. And if we can get rid of that, we should hopefully be able to substantially reduce the variance. So the idea for doing PDIS for options policies is as follows. You're now going to do the same sort of offline evaluation, but we're going to assume a special structure of both the policy we had in the demonstrations, and the behavior policy, as well as the type of policy that we want to evaluate. So we're going to assume that both of them are option style policies, and that we want to get an estimate of the new option style policy. So now our PDIS estimator is going to look a little bit different. So again, this was our previous one, where we have a flat policy, we're taking these products of all these importance sampling weights. Now we're going to change this a little bit because of the particular structure of the type of policies we're interested in. So it's going to look very similar, but things are going to be slightly different in two ways. The first is that the first set of weights we see here are now going to be weights over our meta policy, not our predicate policy. So those mu's there were what option we're deciding when. And then our y's here are going to be sort of sums of reward, and these sums of rewards themselves are going to be involving an importance sampling weight over your option policy. So it's exactly the same PDIS policy as before, except for now we're decomposing how we're writing down the importance sampling weights as well as how we're writing down the reward. So we just sort of decompose it, and then this structure is going to allow us to have significant improvements in this particular case under certain assumptions. Okay, so the first idea is to say, well, let's say we're in the case that we have great options. Maybe someone's given us a really good set, or we've learned them in the past from prior tasks, and now all we want to do is basically tweak our meta option policy. So we're not going to change the primitive policies at all, we're just changing the probability we select them. And so we're only changing that middle row, and the nice thing about doing that is we're only affecting those weights. So everything below is going to be identical because we didn't change anything about our sub-policies or our options. So we're only going to be affected by those weights. And that means that we've effectively reduced the horizon that we have to think about decision making for, and that's included in our variance, from the number of time steps to the number of meta decisions. And that's It's not sort of a simple observation in some ways, but the nice thing about this is this can give us an exponential reduction in the variance of our estimator. So we're moving from 2 to the h, where h was our original time length, to h over k, where k is the average length of the options, and so we get this exponential improvement. So that's good because we generally like exponential improvements. So that's one scenario. The second scenario is that we keep our meta policy, but we're going to tweak how we do some of those options. So maybe we're doing something like grasping, and we say, well, we've got a generally good procedure for how to do grasping, but for some of my underlying policies, I'm going to slightly change how I say get to the cup. So in particular, let's think about maybe just changing one of them, though it extends nicely to more. So we have the same scenario. Now, if we're going to change one option, we're only going to be affecting these important sampling weights in the lower right corner. So we haven't changed our meta. Because we haven't changed our meta policy. So now we're only being affected by that very small subset of the trajectory. And so again, as you would hope, if you only change one option, then the effective horizon in terms of what's affecting our variance is only the length of that particular option k that we've changed. So again, we move from h, where that was our original one, to k. So the key idea here is that if we have this sort of structure and then we're making these limited forms of changes, and of course you can combine them in different ways, you can end up with getting these sort of exponential reductions in the variance because of leveraging this particular structure and how it decomposes your estimator. And we just wanted to verify this in sort of some simple initial toy experiments. So we looked at the taxi domain, which is a classic domain many of you might be familiar with, but you're sort of picking up passengers in a taxi and taking them to destinations. And so it's often used to sort of try out different hierarchical RL approaches. And we're going to modify it to be a little bit noisy, and we want to do offline evaluation in this case. So we've got some behavior policy where we've gathered data, and then we want to evaluate alternative policies. And we've got very simple options here where we're just sort of varying the number of time steps we're running the options. And as you would expect from our theory, what you can see is that we're getting substantial reductions in the mean squared error of our estimated performance of the policy we want to evaluate. So as we would hope, because we're leveraging this structure and we're changing the time horizon, and so we're getting this exponential reduction in the variance, we can see if we can scare this scenario. Okay, the second idea that we thought about in this case in terms of trying to leverage hierarchical structure is to think about options and bottlenecks. So in all of these cases, none of these uniformly apply, but I think they apply in a number of interesting cases. So in the case of options and bottlenecks, we can think about scenarios where there's sort of this bottleneck state which which an agent frequently has to go through to reach a goal. This certainly can happen in things like education. You have to pass pre-calculus before you can get to calculus. I think it happens in some robotics tasks. You think about decomposing rest of tasks where we need to get there, and then once you have made contact, then you can start to move. And so I think in many different situations, not all, but many interesting ones, there are these bottleneck states. And that similarly can give us an interesting benefit. So the idea in this case is that we're going to have different ways to get to the same thing. So if there's only one way to get to these bottleneck states, it's not going to be as interesting. But in many situations, there'll be many ways to get to this bottleneck state. And again, this certainly comes up in things like Atari. Imagine in Montezuma's Revenge, you need to be able to get through these different rooms. And let's say we don't have there to be a single bottleneck state. There might be a distribution over this sort of these termination probabilities of your options. If you want to think of it that way too. And the idea is that we might have a number of different options which will have the same distribution of termination states. So there's sort of this cloud and the same distribution over this sort of bottleneck scenario that you might end up in after you try to grasp something, or the state of the student after they completed calculus. And the idea is that we can, again, exploit this structure in order to get significant benefits. So essentially, we can just decompose it, because as soon as we know that the distribution over termination conditions is identical for all the options that you could be executing at that point, it doesn't matter which option you picked. It's all going to be the same resulting termination distribution. So you can just simply decompose your trajectory. And So again, it's a simple observation, but the nice thing about this is that we're then, instead of dealing with, in this case, an age-length trajectory, we're going to start partitioning our trajectory according to these choke points, or according to the cases where we know we have this identical termination distribution, and that can again yield an enormous benefit. So what this looks like in the context of precision importance sampling is that we're going to partition our trajectories, and in general you can think of partitioning this many times. We're turning this product into the addition over smaller products. So we're making our effective horizon length the length of the longest partition that you have once you start to split this up. And so again, we're going to get this exponential improvement in the resulting variance estimators because we have taken this long product into a series of additions of small ones. So again, if we look at the taxi domain, if you break the trajectory up at the point where the taxi actually picks up the passenger, and then you separately apply these importance sampling estimators to each side, we can again get an enormous reduction in these orders of magnitude in terms of the means per error. So these are sort of some nice particular cases. We then pushed the work a little bit further and thought about the general issue of how do we trade off bias and variance in these settings. So in these situations, there is no loss of information. If the world really has its options like structure, or this partitioning, or these choke points, you could do this partitioning and you lose you introduce no bias into the system. So your estimator is exactly equivalent to this structure. But in some cases, you might want to evaluate things that are sort of like options, but are not really like options. You might think of there being hierarchical structure, but it's not perfect. And so in those cases, you can make these approximations, but they might not be true. And so then you're going to introduce bias into your estimators. So we thought about generally thinking about these cases where you have products of importance sampling weights, and again, in the case where things really are decomposable, because you have these choke points, you can just make things, you can ignore the first part and make these summable, but in general, you can't do this exactly, and so you can think about making these approximations and trying to formally bound how much bias you introduce into your system. And what we can prove is that under some assumptions of doing this, then we still remain having sort of strongly consistent estimators, but we'll introduce some bias into the time. So one of the exciting things about doing this is that I think it allows us to start tackling enormously longer horizon problems. So this is some preliminary work looking at this for the case of breakout, and this is a scenario where we're again doing a policy evaluation. The idea is you've got existing trajectories and you want to evaluate some alternative policies, and now instead of tackling things on the order of 5 to 10, we can tackle things on the order of 200. We're still working on trying to get up to the full length that most people often play this for, which is on the order of 1,000, but at least we can get up to 200, which is a good step. And we can start to have estimators that are accurate enough to be able to distinguish between, close to being able to distinguish between the behavior policy and evaluation policy. And again, that's really important because that's where we can actually make policy selection decisions. So just to summarize, I think that this use of efficient learning from the past and leveraging the structure there can be really powerful. And I think one of the things we're really excited about using this for is to think about this also for online policy search. Because while I've been talking about the case where you have all this data collected in advance, whenever you're doing online reinforcement learning, you effectively have this growing, up to memory constraints, this growing body of data that you could use to be doing better policy search along the way. And so I think that the sort of work we're doing in Breakout is an example of how we perhaps move this towards the online setting. I just want to highlight that we have a couple of posters here today, and also mention that we have some postdoc opportunities in this general space, and so if you're interested, please come talk to me. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have time for some questions. If anyone wants to walk up to the mic, you're welcome.
In the first part of your talk, you talked about the variance reduction, which you can get ahead of the hierarchical. Have you thought about maybe a principled way where you can choose, like how to decompose into the option? Because that's kind of the missing part in this thing. So have you had any thought about that?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question to say, like, if you don't know, how would you get that hierarchy? Maybe you could trade off between different ones. In this case, we're assuming that people have picked a particular policy that they want to evaluate. Normally, you could imagine doing policy search over this, or policy search over sort of hierarchically parameterized policies. And I would hope to get a similar speed up as we're seeing here in terms of variance, and then you can search over that restricted class. But we haven't looked at here how to define the options.
Concerning bottlenecks, so one thing that wasn't quite clear to me, I might have just missed it, but are the bottlenecks predetermined by the designer of the algorithm, or is there some way to learn the bottlenecks?
So it's a great question. In this case, we're assuming we know the options themselves, and in order to know the bottlenecks, we would need to know what the termination distribution is over options. And in some cases, you don't know that because you don't know the dynamics of the world. If you knew that particular information, it would allow you to decompose it. In other cases, you might assume you have some knowledge that you think you could try that on, but then you might introduce some bias. Because if you don't know the dynamics of the world, it would be hard to know that bottleneck exists.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. So now we have the coffee break, and we'll be back with Matt Potnik and Dominic Prikop. So let's thank once again Emma Brusca.